Hello, everybody. It's Max with Crypto Talk now. Hoping you're enjoying this Thanksgiving weekend. So, without further ado, while we're going to go ahead and jump into today's quants coverage, I definitely would advise to check out the last quant video in regards to the tokenization of digital assets as a service, if you will. It's a very nice deep dive into reference of what we're talking about, of course, in today's particular video and so on. And if anything, it'll give you a broader perspective of this particular coverage from Cybos 2022, which, of course, in today's video, we're going to outline at least a couple more key things in regards to that guide. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And what I want to show you basically is this right here, and that is this particular interview from, of course, Gilbert Verdian, of course, with Andrew Carriar, and also the Chief Product Officer, which is Martin Hargreaves. And in this particular section, it's going to give you a broader perspective, not just on interoperability and so on, but what Quant brings to the table, if you will, when it comes to the subject of interoperability, and especially when it comes to setting a standard for ISOs and so on. So I'm going to, of course, pause it in certain key areas. I'm going to, of course, take myself out of the frame just here briefly, but we'll get more and more into just that, what Quant brings to the table as far as these standards go for ISO 222. And if anything, if you've seen some of our XRP coverage, it gives you, of course, a broader perspective. But my key thing was I definitely wanted to, of course, bring this to your guys' attention because I felt as though it was significant, to say the least. We'll, of course, be back here in just a moment, and here we go.
And maybe that's one of the issues here around this, this term interoperability. It means different things to different people, doesn't it? And so people talk about it not having yet been cracked, and we sit here thinking, well, we have cracked it, but there is more to it than that. I mean, there's also standards involved, business knowledge, business flows, etc. What do you think is it going to take to give the industry that sense of, okay, we've cracked this now. This is interoperability is no longer an issue.
What we set out to do was really shape where the industry should go, and we've taken a very collaborative global approach to this by shaping what the standards should be and establishing different types of standards at different levels within different international organizations. So they're all worked on collaboratively with the industry, and they're all agreed with all members and all participants of the industry. So it's not forcing standards on top of existing systems or vendors or technology. It's actually collaboratively coming up with what a standard has to be for the industry to adopt. So that's the work that we've done with ISO, with ISO TC307, which is the blockchain ISO standard. The concept of that was to create something similar to the payment standards that we have, like 222. Separate to that, we've been collaborating on numerous levels in numerous governments and other organizations, but we've also started creating protocol standards within the IETF and with MIT. And for us, this is our way of giving back and using the background and the expertise that we've got and the learnings from all the engagements and technologies that we've built for it to become part of the standards that everyone's going to eventually use.
So in summary, whatever the definition of interoperability.
So just one key thing I definitely wanted to mention, and by the way, I wasn't able to full screen this because it doesn't give it an option for it, so that's why I took it myself out of the frame. But if anything, like Gilbert basically outlined right here, it's them creating the standard. And when I'm thinking of that myself, as far as, Quant's stance on interoperability, let's face it, they are setting not only a standard by creating just that in itself, right? These multiple standards, but they are the standard, right? So by them explaining, for instance, in this particular interview with Andrew Carriar, by creating that particular standard for interoperability for these various other blockchains and so on, it's kind of like they're the backbone, if you will, when it comes to all of this. And that gets me really, really excited because, if anything, you know, it's literally making not just what, some of these particular examples that you see with various other blockchains interoperable, but, some of the other key things that were mentioned, it's not just that in itself. It's literally making the world interoperable when it comes to some examples, when it comes to the financial sectors. I mean, I know that's one of the biggest examples, but some of the other key developments they have, basically, like, it's mentioned here that we're likely to see over the next 12 months. And of course, one of the big things that's going to happen in, for instance, March, because of ISO 222. So I just wanted to, of course, point some of those things out. We're going to, of course, hear a little more in regards to that in just a moment.
Interoperability, as you would say, we've solved this.
Interoperability is multifaceted. It's within ISO, I mean, we're creating an interoperability framework which not only looks at technical, it looks at legal, business, governance, and other types of interoperability, which, if you bring it all together, you're creating a common set of rules between participants on how they should interact and transact, and then you're creating common protocols where they can actually talk to each other. So those two is really what true harmonized interoperability should be.
So another thing I just really want to, bring to your attention. So I don't know if you've ever, used, for instance, gone to a foreign country, for instance, right, and use, for instance, like a computer there, and for us, we don't even think about it, right? So it's like, especially here in the United States, this is the text that you see on the screen, right? So, like, for instance, where it says, in our guide to Sibos 2022, published before this event, et cetera, on this screen is all in English. You can imagine you go into a place where, all of it could be in, in Mandarin, right? Or all of it could be in, for instance, South Korean, Korean characters or something, or heck, in Japan, Japanese characters and whatnot. And if anything, that is their particular alphanumeric set of characters that they have on the screen. You can imagine the difficulty that is created, basically, when from point A to point B, like I mentioned before, where a message is sent. We'll use, of course, the example of a bank trying to withdraw a certain amount of money or transfer a certain amount of money. Let's say $5 trillion from point A to point B. And from point A, it's all in English, like you see right now. And then the point B, it's literally, garbled, if you will, in that particular message, because it's just that. It's the alphanumeric characters. The old system that we've used since the early 1970s, when these particular messages are sent, it's not going to get sent over and interpreted in a way which completely makes sense, if you will. It's going to be taking little snippets of that. And it's just, it causes a lot of pain, and as the saying goes, friction. But with Quant being able to create a frictionless, I guess you could say, society, or creating financial solutions, just that, literally financial solutions that take this friction out of the equation, is a real game changer. So when he mentions some of these things about, some of the ISO messaging and et cetera, I'm literally thinking about, what that entails. And some of the examples that he outlines here is just that, again, having that message sent from, I don't know, the Bank of England to the Bank of South Korea, for instance, and having the technology, the protocols, like you just mentioned, is really, really crucial. So I, again, wanted to point out some of those key things. And you're going to hear a lot about this more and more, especially when it comes to the likes of ISO and so on. So let's kick it back into the particular coverage here, and then we'll come back.
The question that you asked, when the customers think that interoperability is solved, is when all of their customers can talk to all of the customers they want to without any friction, right? And our view is there's not one vendor that's going to do that, right? You get a lot of, particularly some of the larger vendors and some of the blockchain vendors. If everybody uses our solution, it'll be interoperable. That's not going to work, not at this point in the market anyway. So to Gilbert's point, the reason why we're creating standards is so that our solutions can work with other people's solutions, and this thing can be stitched together into one large global community, because it's the community the rules for that, how the schemes work together, the jurisdictions, the formats that make it straightforward and frictionless to conduct business. That, I think, is the interoperability that we're aiming for, not a monoculture.
If DLT and
I mean, think about that in itself. So setting that standard, right? So everybody can talk with each other and so on. He's not. It's also like the message again that's being portrayed here. It's not, hey, you guys from all these other blockchains and so on. You have to make yourself. You think you're interoperable, but you're not. You're gonna have to make yourself compatible with Quant. No, it's not that at all. It's literally them, as in Quant, literally writing the ISO standard. Again, look at Gilbert's background, dating all the way back to 2014 when he wrote an ISO standard. So it's taking that and applying it towards what's basically going on as we speak, and then again setting or writing these particular standards. As long as for instance, all these different organizations, whether it's blockchains and so on, understand, it's not about Quant trying to set it in which we have to be compatible with them. No, they write a standard. Here's why we have those particular standards in place. We have them in place because it's just better for business in general, and it will create everything to be that much more interoperable. Because, like they mentioned before, there's one thing about having interoperability standards that a certain blockchain thinks that they have, and being truly just that interoperable. So let's get back a little bit into this particular interview, and of course we'll show you guys some more updates in regards to what's going on with Quant.
and interoperability of the how, if you like. I wanted to sort of take you from the how to the what. Why would we bother doing any of this stuff, implementing any of this tech? And of course, one of the most compelling ends is the advent of institutional digital assets. We heard about it all week long at Sibos. It seemed to be on almost everyone's mind. Again, I'm just going to go back to our guide and tell you what our take was before the event. We wrote, the digitization of transactions and assets through tokenization will deliver transformative improvements for investors and issuers alike. But it should be transparent to end users and demands a new framework and approach. So, as I say, I felt that listening to the conference sessions at Sibos, even the big institutions had accepted that it's just a matter of time before we get digital assets ingrained with the more traditional financial system. Was that your impression? What was your take on it, Gilbert?
I think the business case adds up, where one of the talks which had State Street, it had Northern Trust and others, Clearstream, talking about what they've done. And what they demonstrated was, if they were to build a new platform using non-DLT, let's just pretend it doesn't exist, it would have taken them 3 to 5 years just to get the thing up and running. They've taken that same concept and used DLT technology, and they have completed everything end-to-end in less than a year, so about 8 months. So speed to market is a huge competitive advantage for them. And using DLT, it's the accelerator, because what they can do is automate a whole bunch of complex back-end processes. They can issue digital assets in a new way, which are all immutable, or they're all accessible to different members and different stakeholders. Whereas if they didn't have that, they would have to create huge amounts of networks, infrastructure, applications would have to be protected, databases would have to be isolated and then synced and reconciled. So all these manual processes just to make it work. That all goes away with DLT. It's a real transformative technology, but more importantly, it's a business accelerator now. And so they've actually had customers come to them saying, I would like to issue a new security, whatever it may be, and they're able to serve the market in a very rapid way, which they could never do before. So their customers are happy because they can become public or issue securities as quickly as they need.
Martin, you're the man who's in charge of all of our products. Did you have people coming up to you and asking you for this and talking to you about it?
Yeah, on the security side, absolutely. Yeah. So particularly around interoperability again, right? So there's folks that are building security systems, and they've done a great job, but actually they want to connect that to a much broader range of users and investors. So primarily that's the conversations that we've been having. There's been an element of, can you help us build stuff? which we absolutely can. But also we've built this thing, and now how do we grow it?
Well, when I think about digital assets, I was very struck by one thing, which is I heard a lot of big banks, and you don't often hear big banks doing this, crying out for regulation. I heard this again and again. I made a note of it. Umar Farouk from JP Morgan, he had a quote I liked. He said, "There's no way law enforcement allows people to move money across borders and not check it." And that was a bit, sort of, I think he was making a bit of a light-hearted comment, but I think all of the institutions want regulation because they want certainty to understand, how these assets are going to be dealt with. Gilbert, how do you think that's going to play out? How long before the regulators sort of catch up and give the banks the framework that they seem to be calling out for?
Regulators have had over 10 years to look at this. They've spent most of the time trying to understand the market, and before it was actually quite a small nascent market. It didn't.
Let's just take a moment to basically pause on what he's talking about. So there's been a lot of what is referred to is like a test net, if you will, when it comes to testing out just that, seeing how well this will work and so on. And this is, of course, been going on for a while now. And if anything, I mean, if you rewind back, even just 5 years and so on, of course, Gilbert mentions the whole example, 10 years, those are just basically like ideas, if you will. But those ideas are coming into like full fruition now. We are beyond like the testnet stage and whatnot. Technically speaking, I mean, we're basically approaching like a mainnet. How do we know that? Well, if anything, we already tested out some of these messages. Like, for instance, with ISO 2022, there's already been, the whole thing of let's test out this particular message being sent from point A to point B and so on, and let's see how well this is received with the likes of, for instance, this particular bank in this particular country, and and so on. And what Gilbert was basically, sharing here is, back then you had, in a sense, the framework of how that was all going on, and of course, and within recent years, especially with Quant, what they have been developing and so on, and then now seeing how they are basically, they as in Quant are laying down that foundation by setting the standard with these protocols, right, with ISO 222 and so on. That gives you a better perspective of it's beyond just a test net. It's literally a mainnet at this point. And that flip of the switch, I'm sure you guys heard that quite a few times when it comes to Ripple's XRP, Stellar Lumens, XLM, and so on. Those particular technologies is part of that flip of the switch. So I just want people to have a kind of a broader perspective of how this is all tied in. But to see the likes of Quant and how they are literally the backbone, right? Like the central nervous system of all of this. It is really, really something, because I mean, I guess that's a good analogy to a sense, is like, it is all connected, and how Quant is able to set that standard and continue to set that standard, if anything, will create that much more demand for Quant, and if anything, people will realize just how innovative they are, because they're not just into one particular sector, if you will. For instance, I mean, my big focus, and a lot of you guys' big focus, is of course what they bring to the table as far as the whole thing of the financial sector, right? That's how we achieve these monumental market caps. But again, like if you've seen some of our other coverage here at CTN, basically what they bring to the table as far as even in healthcare and so on. I mean, we're talking different industries with not just billions, but literally trillions, and in some cases, let's face it, with the financial sectors, like quadrillions of money being flowed through those particular sectors. I mean, CBDCs in itself, not even counting the rest of the world, it's just the central banks of Europe and so on, is a massive, massive thing, to say the least. All right, we're gonna listen to a little bit more of this, and of course, from there, I'll figure out an area to pause it, because let's face it, the other two topics to wrap up the guide to Sybos would just simply be too long of a video. I don't really want to make this a 1 hour long video and so on, but we'll get into that extra coverage on another day as well. So here we go.
Didn't have enough weight to get on their agenda to do anything about it. So they left that market until it grew up. Now we're looking at digital asset markets in the trillions, whereas before it was quite small. Regulators have had to react. They've had time to understand the market and the protections that consumers need and businesses must follow to keep things safe. I think they've caught up, personally. We've seen quite a lot of kind of light touch regulation where it's been guidelines over the last 10 years, but I think now it's become law in a few jurisdictions, and other jurisdictions are still behind because they're trying to figure out which agencies should regulate what, talking about the US specifically. What we're seeing in Europe is kind of like a harmonized approach to policy, which is the right way to do it. The MiCA regulation, which was only passed about 2 weeks ago, that's law now, and that's coming in, and that gives very clear certainty to all the institutions and to consumers and investors and what they're doing in this space. That's the right way to do it, and I think Europe's taken that challenge head on and done something about it, and I think it's the right market to see regulation flourish. JP Morgan's probably referring to US regulation.
Yeah.
I think the US will follow Europe eventually once they figure out jurisdiction, but it's pretty much the same globally. The rules around digital assets and what protections are needed on the buyer and the seller end are quite similar when you look at it.
So basically what Gilbert just mentioned right there is true, and it's a sad thing to say the least. I mean, 2023 is going to be a massive year for this whole thing with, these particular ISO coins, tokens, and so on, right? The likes of especially Quant, especially XRP, right? XLM. You can even throw into the mix like ALBT, Algorand, some of the other ones, right? Casper and so on. But the ones that really, you're going to notice the start of it, if you will. I think the general consensus, especially if you've been following this, is definitely the likes of Ripple's XRP and Stellar, right? Especially with what Quant brings to that because the interoperability. But what Gilbert mentioned right there, as far as the U.S. Basically has fallen behind, if you will, and it's sad to see that. It's because of this whole thing with trying to get regulation going. It just it's not. I guess you could say. How should I put this? It wasn't until recently that now there's this whole jump start, if you will, of them trying to, get things going. Is what I'm trying to say. Is, for instance, the whole thing with FTX is what I'm basically saying. So before then, of course, there was the whole Taki regulation, and it's just kind of like a stack of papers that just kind of sits on somebody's desk, and they'll get to it eventually. Of course, now that is been sent up the chain and to the top of the queue, if you will, and rightfully so, because that was a horrible thing that's happened. But again, it's not that the United States won't be ISO 222 compliant and so on. The problem is they're not showing up to the big show, if you will, until 2025. And of course, we outlined that many times on our live show. But if anything, hopefully they, as in the United States, we will realize that, when all this thing kicks into full motion, hopefully by March, because that's, of course, when the mandate's supposed to happen with ISO 222, that the United States, somebody who's smart and so on, and has a position of power, will realize, listen, this needs to go up the chain of command, if you will. We need to get things done to, have this be beneficial for American people, as well as institutions here in the United States. I know we're not putting so much focus, of course, on the retail investors from this point of view, but showing up to to the big show, if you will, by 2025 is, in my opinion, it's not really acceptable, and that might end up very well being the reality of it. But I'm glad that they, of course, outlined that in this particular interview. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and shift towards another area of our quant coverage. I know there's quite a bit in regards to this. This is just the 1870 mark. I mean, this is something that's going to be covered an ongoing series. I apologize on how I said that, but an ongoing series on our coverage for the guide to Sibos, because it's such a deep dive, if you will, to wrap your mind around it and so on. And of course, shout out to some of you guys who are really, really into this and so on. I mean, that's awesome. But of course, for the person that's, people that are new to this and so on, I mean, it is quite a bit to wrap your head around. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit more in regards to all this. So again, shout out to Quant Papa for providing this particular information that I'm going to show you to you right now. I'm actually just going to come into the frame for just a bit. But, it's really cool to see some of this, to say the least. And, that's why I like showing, different content creators, whether it's Quant Papa, there's a few other ones especially like when we cover XRP, Crypto Lulu, right? And so on. But check this out. So for instance, this is from Inaptba, INATBA. I just like calling it Inaptba. It shows basically, as of recent, that Gilbert Verdin has been appointed co-chair of Inaptba. And listen to this for about 37 seconds, why this is significant. And of course, we'll get into the meaning behind all this and what, Quant basically brings to the table in that regard. Again, 37 seconds, and then we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Verdian, CEO of Quant Network. I've been recently appointed co-chair of the Inatba Standards Committee alongside Isma Arribas and Monique Buckner. So what's the committee going to do? We're looking to facilitate the collaboration and harmonization of standards development across standards organizations such as ISO and ITU. And what we're looking to do is facilitate the membership of Inatba to have a neutral platform for the development of standards globally.
All right, again, setting that particular standard. Now, with that said, here's something I want to show you. So, again, shout out to Quant Papa for providing this. But, actually on this particular one, I think I am going to take myself out of the frame again because, it just needs to be blown up a little bit bigger. So, here's this, and let me just blow that up. So, there you go. And look at this, for instance, Interledger Protocol Family and ISO 222 ecosystem, right? Like, we always talk about different blockchains ecosystem. Well, literally the ISO 222 standard has its own ecosystem and so on. So you see literally Quant in the middle of that. For instance, that interoperability they have with, Ripple's XRP. Heck, you even see IOTA in that mix. And for instance, there's this whole thing with R3 Corda, right? And then on top of that, I mean, you see, for instance, IBM, Stellar. It goes on from there, on and on from there, especially with Swift. There's so much talk about Swift, because that's, the old system. Again, if you're new to all this, it's not that, Swift is being replaced. So many content creators state that, Swift is going away. Swift is not going away. If anything, their infrastructure is being upgraded to these new technologies. They're implementing the likes of Ripple's XRP, Stellar Lumens, right? XLM. They even talked with Gilbert and also Martin Hargreaves of Quant. How do we know that? Because of this particular Sibos 2022 conference, right? So you see, of course, all these other things. Heck, we even cover Zenfin's XDC right here at CTN as well. Of course, we talked about Algorand and so on. But I mean, again, gives you an idea of how Quant, when they make that statement that they set the standard. When you hear Gilbert especially mention that, setting the standards, not just one, this gives you a broader perspective. Again, Quant is right in the middle of that. It's not just throwing out some crazy thing of oh, this is what they're about to do. They already have done it, and if anything, again, is setting that setting those standards of what is to be expected as far as these financial sectors doing business and so on. A little bit more in regards to this, like here's some more, to show you a little bit of an example of just that. And of course, this is Inatba, like he was mentioning, he's now been appointed. And you see that in the middle. So it's Quant, it's Enapta, again, the founding members. It's just so massive for Quant to be able to see this, in my humble opinion. A little bit more in regards to all this. And of course, shout out to Quant Papa. So for instance, we just talked about some of these things like with R3 Corda. So it says, for instance, like what you see here, selects Corda for its Project Ion accelerated sentiment platform. But what I want to show you is, of course, some of this other stuff here. So there's this, and if you're not familiar with SIA, I like this particular example that's shown here. So it said diversified use cases in various ecosystems. They have quite a few different ones, to say the least. And when you get around to this particular part right here, where it's highlighted, like, so for instance, it says the breakthrough was achieved by integrating Quant Network's overledger technology into SIA chain private blockchain infrastructure to enable cross-platform applications and services in Europe and, of course, just that globally. Gives you an idea of like when this is all, first all started. So it says Quant Network, a leading pioneer in enterprise blockchain technology, and SIA, European high-tech company ledger, or should say leader, in the fields of payment services and infrastructures, and subsidiary of CDP Equity. Apologize, I say CBDC so much that it just comes out that way. So of CDP Equity have successfully tested cross-blockchain interoperability between multiple DLT products. And the reason why I'm showing this is because, again, with what I mentioned, basically, it's like we're not in these test nets anymore. If anything, it's like we're basically in the main net of what we have. And how do we know that? Again, refer to some of the previous videos that we have outlined for you guys. You literally hear Gilbert mentioning how, the likes of Quant and what they developed, they focused on their product and what they could bring to the table. And then from there, in the process of doing so, they made all these partnerships and so on. So I definitely wanted to point out some of this because, again, yes, in 2020, but again, it gives you a broader perspective of where they were and where they're at now. So check this out. So for instance, it says the development of the solution began in mid-2019 and a full program of testing has been executed on SIA chain, R3 Corda, and private Ethereum platforms. Quant Network and SIA will now work together to go to the market developing and implementing of further innovative use cases and applications addressing blockchain interoperability challenges. Now, one thing I want to show with you guys here is some of just that. And that, of course, is like some of what you saw right here. And on top of that, it's in regards to what we also saw. I just pull it up for you. Sorry about that. This right here. This was the main thing I wanted to show you. So I know I'm out of the frame, but if anything, I'm just trying to make it bigger for you guys to see. So when we talk briefly about SIA chain, again, this whole thing started, of course, with back to 2019, and of course the testing of that right in 2020. And if anything, this should be one of the key areas of this particular video that I want to bring your attention to you, and why this is significant, and of course why I'm presenting this to you. So like you see, it says SIA chain blockchain/DLT infrastructure with unique set of features, right? So as you can see right here, the SIA strategy states private distributed blockchain architecture based on the SIA nets, as well as SIA private network connecting 580 plus clients globally. And basically that's 580 plus SIA net nodes, as well as 170,000 kilometers of fiber optic network, right? Like if you're into, if you understand the whole thing of fiber optic networks and so on, again, connecting the world on the modern infrastructure of the internet and so on. You also see this area here where it says direct or private cloud implementation, centralized services for decentralized solutions, multiple DLT platforms, for instance, R3's Corda, Ethereum, Ripple, Hyperledger, Fabric, etc. But look at the bottom, for instance, private permission network, secure, open to interoperate with other networks, geographically distributed, and of course, European governance, the ITA. It gives you a perspective of how this is already connected and so on. Right, the world of SIA, more than 2,300 clients in 51 countries. And again, a lot of this is going to be coming live. The majority of this is going to happen in March. Through what? ISO 222. And again, I'm glad I got this blown up for you, because look at this, right? You have this whole thing with R3 Corda, right? And excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in our recent coverage we had, for instance, on our XRP video, it shows Crypto Lulu. He's explaining in detail the connection with CBDCs and R3 Corda and so on. And again, look at this. You have the likes of Gilbert Verdian here with these particular individuals at just that R3 Corda. Now, why is that significant? It's significant in so many different ways. But if anything, look at this. Like it mentions, bridging DeFi and regulated financial markets to unlock value. Openness, connectivity, and trust are the backbone of the digital economy. But I'm looking at it like this. Quant is the backbone of the digital economy, because they have the software, they have the overledger, they have this basically like this operating system that makes all of this happen. Like it also says right here, interoperability across public and private chains, application systems, and standards is critical. R3 is in development on non-traditional digital assets, moving from Ethereum onto a regulatory compliant Corda-based network. Asset bridging, of course, enabling assets to move from one ledger to another. Atomic swap, two assets can be exchanged simultaneously on separate networks and ledgers. Watch this, the highlights of this, right? So it says the backbone of the digital economy. That's totally Quant. Top of that, interoperability, literally Quant's slogan, across public and private chains. Again, public and private, not just one specific, right? And of course, it's critical. How do we know it's critical? Well, it is. And on top of that, what's happening coming up in March with ISO 222, again, that particular standard and that particular mandate is going to be massive to get things really rocking and rolling for the financial sector, especially in 2023. All right. Before we go ahead and wrap this up, of course, I'm going to come back into the frame. But if anything, I just want to give everybody a broader perspective about all this. When you hear the likes of Gilbert Verdian, like I mentioned before, and even Martin Hargreaves mention these specific things about these particular standards, when we make the claim here at Crypto Talk now about how Quant is basically, Bitcoin, but with the utility, right? Bitcoin doesn't have that. There is no smart contracts and so on. So again, that, more attractive circulating supply that Quant has, all the partnerships they have, a vast ecosystem, heck, the set standard, if you will, when it comes to ISO 222 ecosystem, right? And how they're basically in the middle of all that because they're the backbone. With all those things mentioned, this is what really gets me to want to make more of these Quant videos, and to let more and more people know the significance of Quant, because I basically feel as though that the days of Bitcoin being the number one cryptocurrency in the world, those days are numbered. And again, refer to some of our coverage that we've had going back at least 2 or 3 weeks, especially. We outlined, for instance, within the first 4 to 6 years, compare Quant to the likes of Bitcoin, they really outperformed in market cap what Bitcoin really accomplished and so on. So it's pretty huge, to say the least. And if anything, to see where Quant has been and where it's at now, and you do compare that to the likes of Bitcoin, again, it's just it's monumental. It's basically the wealth, the generational wealth that's going to be created during this time. That's where I am at with this. There's all these other token and coins that we can get into and so on. But for me personally, I put my focus on likes of Quant and the other ISOs, or like, for instance, Ripple's XRP, Stellar Lumens, XDC, so on and so forth. So I know this was kind of a more detailed outline as far as our coverage with likes of Quant. Can't thank you guys enough, especially the ones that stay to the end. Look out for another video that will wrap up our coverage when it comes to the likes of the conference, for instance, with what we have, for instance, going on with the likes of Cybos 2022. I know I say ISO 222 so much that it just rolls off the tongue that way, but we will have at least 1 or 2 more videos in regards to this ongoing series focusing on specifically that, because that was such a very, very important conference that you guys basically heard of, and there was a lot mentioned at that particular event that really needs to have a proper breakdown, if you will. So, guys, thanks again for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and by all means, smash that bell notification for you get notifications about future quant videos or other ISOs that we cover here at CTN. By all means, check out the live show, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, daily. And guys, thanks again. We'll see you on the next one.